Isaiah Carter directed his smooth close to quiet electric vehicle into the confidential authentic skyport. The delicate murmur of the vehicle converged with the weak rustling of the morning breeze. This wasn't an air terminal for the typical Voyager. It radiated eliteness, the kind of spot held for the individuals who had scaled the pinnacles of achievement. Isaiah had worked energetically to become one of those chosen handful. Today was significant as the principal beams of first light kissed the cleaned outside of his personal luxury plane. Issa couldn't resist the opportunity to feel a blend of pride and fervor. The airplane stood gladly on the runway, an image of his excursion, a marriage of state-of-the-art proficiency and downplayed complexity. The side of the fuselage exhaust, his organization's token, a rich plan representing the avionics undertaking he had worked with coarseness and assurance. Isaiah got out of his vehicle, his calfskin dress shoes clicking delicately against the landing area. He paused for a minute to relish the fresh air prior to changing his faultlessly custom-made charcoal suit. A speedy look at his watch, a moderate watch, more viable than Gaudi affirmed. He was exactly on time. Close by, a gathering of ground team individuals waited, talking nonchalantly until they saw him. Their discussion stopped suddenly, supplanted by sidelong looks and mumbles. Isaiah felt it quickly, the unpretentious yet unquestionable change in the air. Throughout the long term he had developed adroit at perceiving such minutes. The weak limiting of eyes, the uncomfortable silence in discussion, the practically subtle fixing of stances. It was a quiet language he'd become familiar with, one that said a lot about uncertainty and predisposition. In spite of his prosperity, these perceived hostilities were a shadow that followed him wherever, even in spaces where incredible skill ought to have won. Isaiah gestured considerately to the specialists as he moved toward his stream. Wheeling his smooth cowhide portfolio behind him, they turned the signal, yet with a firmness that deceived their inconvenience. He disregarded it, turning his concentration to the assignment ahead. The present meeting was essential, an arrangement that could open ways to rewarding worldwide business sectors. Isaiah's flight organization had seen a brilliant ascent based on his strength, sharp business impulses and resolute development. However, he was no outsider to the distress his accomplishments caused in specific circles. As he strolled toward the fly, Isaiah intellectually evaluated the flight plan. Flying wasn't simply a method for movement for him, it was an enthusiasm he had developed long prior to sending off his organization. Procuring his pilot's permit had been an individual victory, the consequence of long stretches of commitment. Presently guiding his airplane represented opportunity and control, an indication of how far he had proceeded. Moving on board, Isaiah stopped and went to take in the scene. The terminal, a smooth and present-day working of glass and steel, mirrored the conditioning tints of the sunrise sky. A couple of early explorers moved through the space, yet the representatives close to the entry drew his consideration. They were watching him, not with easygoing interest, yet with a power that set him tense. He murmured, attempting to shake off the natural load of disquiet. Bias was no more unusual to Isaiah, except for it stung another each time it raised its head. Achievement hadn't safeguarded him from it, assuming anything. It appeared to enhance the examination. He confronted the stream's lustrous surface, sparkled as he moved toward the motors, unobtrusively murmuring in status. This airplane wasn't simply a device for business, it was a demonstration of Isaiah's excursion. He had broken obstructions and surprised everyone to arrive still. Indeed, even as he arranged to take off, he was unable to disregard the waiting pressure all around. Isaiah Carter looked as the ground group moved with rehearsed productivity around his fly, finishing their last mines, the fuel and motor. Their movements, however routine, conveyed a quality of aversion that Isaiah couldn't disregard as he changed the records in his grasp. One of the group, a stocky man with a wrinkled forehead, ventured forward his entryway. Dubious reason, me sir, the man started. His voice impartial, however touched with something Isaiah couldn't exactly pinpoint. Are you the pilot of this airplane? The question got Isaiah off monitor. He had proactively given each fundamental archive from his flight plan to the jet's enrollment. There ought to have been no uncertainty about his job here. His temple wrinkled somewhat as he answered, keeping his tone consistent. Yes, I'm both the proprietor and the pilot. Briefly, skepticism moved quickly over the man's face before he immediately veiled it. I see, he said. Well, we simply have to twofold check a couple of things before you take off. Norm methodology. Isaiah gestured gradually. However, he realized this was a long way from standard. He had gone through endless pre-flight processes previously, and this degree of examination wasn't ordinary anyway. He ruled against contending. Rather, he ventured into his pack, recovered his pilot's permit and other documentation, and gave them over. The man took the papers, looking over them momentarily prior to making a beeline for the control tower. Isaiah watched him go, a natural disquiet crawling into his chest. This wasn't whenever he first had been exposed to additional check. In spite of following convention to the letter, regardless of the amount he accomplished, it appears to be certain individuals were continuously searching because of motivations to uncertainty him. His telephone hummed in his pocket, intruding on his contemplations. An update for his gathering streaked on the screen, a gathering that currently felt frustratingly far off. He excused the warning and turned around to the job needing to be done. There was no utilization in harping on what he had zero control over. Isaiah proceeded with his pre-flight examination, strolling around the stream to look at the wings, tires and motor. The voices of the ground group, currently bunched in a corner, developed stronger. Their eyes followed him, their murmured discussions highlighting the strain all around. This wasn't new to Isaiah. No matter how high he climbed or the number of achievements he that arrived at, there were generally the people who considered him to be an untouchable. Yet he had learned sometime in the past that the best reaction to such questions was to continue to push ahead, to allow his prosperity to talk for itself. The specialists at long last finished their checks, giving Isaiah a thumbs up with a quiet grin. He said thanks to them and moved into the cockpit. As he subsided into the pilot's seat, a feeling of invigoration started to supplant the dissatisfaction. Flying was his getaway, an opportunity to leave the commotion and biases of the world behind. Isaiah went through his psychological agenda: fuel levels, motor execution, weather patterns. Everything gave off an impression of being in line. He was going to turn over the motors at the point when development at the edge of the runway grabbed his eye. Two air terminal security officials stood just past the landing area, their stances tense and inflexible. One was talking into a radio while the other kept his eyes locked on Isaiah. Isaiah's stomach fixed. This was uncommon. His anxiety developed as practically on cue the penetrating blaze of red and blue lights filled the morning fog. A police vehicle sped onto the runway, its alarm slicing through the calm. He shut his eyes briefly, taking a profound breath to center himself. He feared he knew precisely exact thing this was about. Leisurely, purposely, he unfastened his seatbelt and moved out of the plane. As his cleaned shoes contacted the landing area, two officials got out of the watch vehicle. Both kept their hands alarmingly near their holsters. One, a stocky man with a buzz cut and reflected shades, talked first. Sir, move back from the airplane, he yapped, his tone sharp and instructing. Isaiah lifted his hand marginally, showing he represented no danger. Continue to keep his voice quiet, he answered. Great morning, officials. I am Isaiah Carter. I'm the proprietor and pilot of this airplane. Is there an issue? The stocky official squinted at him, disregarding the pleasant presentation. We got a call about dubious movement, he said tersely. Can I see some ID? Isaiah ventured into his coat, recovering his wallet with estimated developments. He gave over his pilot's permit, flight certificates and the plane's enlistment papers. The second official, a more youthful man with an anxious articulation, grabbed the records and started flipping through them with little consideration. This your plane? he asked, the wariness in his voice unquestionable. Yes, Isaiah said, equally smothering the developing disappointment inside him. I've claimed it for a long time. My organization works different. Airplane like this one, the more youthful official sneered, mumbling softly. Should be pleasant. Isaiah grasped his jaw, yet would not take the trap. He knew how rapidly things could raise. The officials traded a look before the more seasoned one talked into his radio control. We will require a full ID check and confirmation on a confidential airplane, he said, his eyes never leaving. Isaiah breathed out gradually. A full ID check could mean long stretches of defers, perhaps more. However, contending would possibly exacerbate the situation. See any problems in the event that we investigate the plane? the more established official asked. However, it was clear his demand was everything except discretionary. Yes, I really do mind, Isaiah answered solidly. This is confidential property. In the event that you might want to look through it, I'll have to see a warrant. The official's jaw fixed, his disturbance noticeable. On the off chance that you don't have anything to conceal, what's the issue? Isaiah met his look tranquilly. The issue, he said, is that I've given all the essential documentation. I've gotten everything done right. In the event that you don't completely accept that that is your issue, not mine. The unease between them was intense as Isaiah made a stride back, his each move purposeful. He won't allow them to scare him, not today, not ever. A group was starting to assemble at the edge of the runway. Air terminal staff murmuring among themselves, some pointing toward Isaiah. Their demeanors went from gentle interest to through and through doubt. Not even one of them ventured forward to explain what is happening or vouch for Isaiah. In spite of his reported responsibility for stream. Where are you headed, Mr. Carter? the more youthful official asked, his suspicion scarcely covered. New York, Isaiah answered quietly. I have an significant conference. The more seasoned insubordination. Isaiah could feel the strain mounting, yet he persevered. He wouldn't let their questions and presumptions shake him. This wasn't just about demonstrating his responsibility for plane. It was tied in with going to bat for himself and declining to be threatened. Isaiah Carter stood quietly as the officials traded a look, the pressure between them thick. Furthermore, harsh. After a long interruption, the more seasoned official sneered, his demeanor one of weak haughtiness. Okay, he expressed, venturing back somewhat. Yet don't leave town presently. We'll be back after we've run your name. Isaiah gave a brief gesture, veiling the disappointment bubbling inside him. He looked as the officials withdrew to their watch vehicles, one of them previously talking into the radio while the other signaled energetically toward a gathering of air terminal staff. The more youthful official tossed a jeering look toward Isaiah, prior to forcibly closing the vehicle entryway with superfluous power. Briefly, Isaiah shut his eyes and attracted a profound steadying breath. He expected to remain formed, blowing his top presently would just give them more ammo to use against him. Rather, he ventured into his coat pocket, took out his telephone and dialed a natural number remaining on the landing area. His telephone close by. Isaiah took a second to notice the scene. The blazing lights of the watch vehicles gleamed off the immaculate surface of his fly-in. Unwanted sign of the insult unfurling before him. He had confronted circumstances like this before. Examples Where his prosperity and personality were questioned, however, this felt different. The aggression in the air was practically unmistakable. A harsh power overwhelming him. The officials hadn't even offered him the kindness of a seat inside the terminal. While they led their alleged examination, the embarrassment of being passed on to remain on the runway stung yet. Isaiah was resolved not to allow them to perceive how profoundly it impacted him. He squared his shoulders, all his impulses cautioning him that the circumstance was going to heighten further. The ringing in his ears halted, and a sharp, recognizable voice got through the line. "Isaiah." "Rebecca, it's me," Isaiah said, keeping his voice estimated however firm. Rebecca Green, his legal advisor, was known for her sharp psyche and immovable assurance. On the off chance that anybody could deal with this, it was her. "What's happening?" Rebecca asked, her tone currently serious. "I'm at Real Skyport and we have an issue," Isaiah started. "The police are here holding me up for not an obvious explanation. They're scrutinizing my responsibility for flight despite the fact that I've given all the expected documentation." There was a concise quiet on the opposite end, and Isaiah could picture Rebecca squinting her eyes in that computing way she did while surveying what is going on. "Have they looked the plane?" she asked, her voice low and mindful. "No," Isaiah answered. "I denied except for they've made it clear they don't really accept that me. They're running a full record verification as we talk." "Great," Rebecca said energetically. "You did the correct thing. They have no legitimate right to look without a warrant. I'm on my way. I'll be there quickly." Isaiah breathed out delicately, feeling a slight arrival of pressure. "Expresses gratitude toward Rebecca. Just keep it together," she said solidly. "Don't allow them to scare you. I'll deal with this." Isaiah finished the call and slipped his telephone once more into his pocket, his brain hustling with potential results. Rebecca would deal with the legitimate side, yet meanwhile he needed to stay calm and composed regardless of how legitimized his outrage may feel. Allowing it to show would just compound the situation. He looked toward the watch vehicles where the officials were presently addressing another appearance, a somewhat more seasoned man, maybe a higher positioning official. Their discussion was vivified with motions and head shaking that made it clear they were preparing for something else serious. Isaiah's consideration moved as the more youthful official from prior split away from the gathering and strode intentionally toward him. His stance was unbending, his demeanor pompous. "Mr. Carter," the official said, his voice bound with deviousness, "we will require you to totally pull back from the airplane. You're not permitted close to it until we completed our examination." Isaiah squinted, his eyes marginally, his disappointment clear in his tone. "And how lengthy do you anticipate that should accept?" "I have a conference to go to." The official shrugged, plainly unaffected by Isaiah's earnestness. "The same length as it takes," he said straight. "We need to ensure this plane isn't taken." Isaiah gripped his jaw, compelling himself to resist the urge to panic. "I've given you each record you requested," he said, his voice consistent however firm. "My pilot's permit, the enlistment papers, everything is all together." The official collapsed his arms, his grin never arriving at his eyes. "Individuals produce records all the time," he said nonchalantly, "particularly with top-of-the-line property like this. We can't be too cautious." Isaiah felt a flood of outrage ascend inside him, yet packed it down. This wasn't about technique, it was about bias. Regardless of how much proof he gave, they had proactively chosen not to believe him. "I comprehend you have something important to take care of," Isaiah said, his voice quiet regardless of the situation unfolding inside him. "However, I guarantee you this plane is mine and all that I've introduced is authentic." The official didn't answer quickly, his look fixed on Isaiah as though looking for any indication of shortcoming. Isaiah held fast his stance undaunted. This was his property, his all-consuming purpose, and no measure of wariness or antagonism would change that. The more youthful official sneer enlarged into something practically ruthless provocation. He repeated jokingly, "We're simply being exhaustive. You wouldn't maintain that we should allow a likely criminal to take off in a taken fly, would you?" Isaiah maintained eye contact with the officer, his clenched hands grasping firmly at his sides. He perceived this strategy quite well. They were bedeviling him, trusting he'd snap and give them a reason to raise. He wouldn't play their game before he could answer. A gathering of air terminal security workforce drew closer, attracted to the unfurling show. Driving them was a man in a fresh Naval Force uniform with the real Skyport badge weaved unmistakably on his chest. His tone was excessively courteous, however his eyes conveyed a smidgen of allegation as they arrived on Isaiah. "What is by all accounts the issue here, officials?" the man asked. The more youthful official fixed somewhat his priggish articulation. "Faithful, we got a report about dubious action." He made sense of this. "Honorable man claims he possesses the stream, yet we're simply checking the authenticity of that guarantee." The Air Terminal Authority gestured gradually, his look staying fixed on Isaiah. There was a glint of uncertainty in his demeanor, as though the possibility of Isaiah possessing the plane didn't exactly agree with him. "I see," he said, his voice estimated. "It's rare for somebody to fly their personal luxury plane without a group. You can figure out why this raises concerns, Mr. Carter." Isaiah took a full breath, constraining himself to remain even-tempered notwithstanding the mounting pressure. "It's typical for somebody who's both an authorized pilot and the proprietor of the airplane," he said, his tone consistent however firm. The authority tightened his lips, obviously unconvinced. "Maybe," he said after a stop, "yet given the conditions I believe it's ideal on the off chance that we coordinate completely with the police until everything is figured out." Isaiah felt his heart sink. It was obvious now that nobody in power here was his ally. The air terminal staff had proactively made their inferences, and the police were utilizing that predisposition to push their plan. It didn't make any difference the number of records Isaiah that introduced or how serenely he accounted for himself. They had currently concluded he didn't have a place. The more seasoned official, who had been generally quiet, ventured forward, then his hand resting inauspiciously near his holster. His stance emanated authority as he tended to Isaiah. "Look," he said, his voice low and threatening, "we can make this simple. Or on the other hand we can make it hard. Step away from the plane or we'll need to put you collared for block." Isaiah felt the blood channel from his face capture for remaining close to his own property. The ludicrousness of the danger blew his mind. However, the official's appearance left no question they were ready to follow through. Lifting his hands somewhat in a token of consistency, Isaiah said serenely, "I'm venturing ceaselessly. However, for the record, I'm doing as such under pressure. This is my plane. What's more, I've done nothing out of sorts." The more seasoned official gave a little gesture, recognizing the assertion, however with no trace of regret in his eyes. He was only making a cursory effort, uninterested in truth or equity. Isaiah moved in an opposite direction from the stream, his heart beating in his chest. The heaviness of many eyes overwhelmed him, officials, air terminal staff, and, surprisingly, hardly any travelers standing around somewhere far off watching the exhibition unfurl. He'd never felt so uncovered, so powerless, in spite of legitimately own beginning and end in sight. As he ventured back, the more youthful official, high level, his grin immovably set up pivot, he requested, his tone trickling with joke, "We're must hunt you." Isaiah's eyes augmented. "Scan me for what?" "Just standard system," the official answered, his grin never faltering. "Except if you've got something to conceal." Grating his teeth, Isaiah turned gradually, his hands at his sides. He knew not to oppose the official's search was superfluously Unpleasant as though he was attempting to incite Isaiah into responding, Isaiah kept his level-headedness, declining to give them what they needed. When the pursuit was over, the official ventured back, his failure tangible. "You're perfect," he said, sounding nearly astonished. Isaiah went to confront him, staring at the more youthful man. "I let you know," he said unobtrusively. "I don't have anything to conceal." The official shrugged, yet there was a propensity of pressure in his developments now, as though acknowledging things weren't unfurling as he'd expected. "Does it mean you're allowed to go?" the more seasoned official added from behind him. "We're actually sitting tight for check." Isaiah held fast, his appearance indistinguishable each sense let him know they weren't keen on finding reality. They were searching for a reason to keep him. He wasn't right here going to give them one. Isaiah Carter gazed down at the landing area, his clenched hands holding and unclenching at his sides. The stifling feeling of being caught in a bad dream was intimately acquainted, a world where no measure of proof might at any point still up in the air to see him as short of what he was. Nevertheless, he declined to allow them to break him. "Not presently, not ever." He stood unmoving, the official's words waiting in the air like an insult. Each pointless search, each sneer, it was each of the a determined sign of how little his prosperity appeared to issue in minutes like these. All his means had been intentional, his reports perfect, but here he was dealt with like a lawbreaker by the very framework committed to maintain the law. Isaiah looked at his telephone, checking the time. Every moment of defer carried him closer to imperiling the gathering that could characterize the eventual fate of his organization. The load in his chest wasn't dread, yet weariness, the natural hurt of taking on similar conflicts in meeting rooms at designated spots. And presently, on the landing area, he took out his telephone and dialed Rebecca Green again, his legal counselor and nearest partner, addressed very quickly, her voice sharp and unflinching. "Isaiah," she said, her tone cut with direness. "They're still holding me," Isaiah said unobtrusively, watching out for the officials close by. "They've looked through me, called for reinforcement, and presently they're looking at confining me until they check all that." Rebecca's tone obscured. "This is totally unsuitable. Don't say one more word to them. I'll deal with it when I arrive." Isaiah could hear the fire in her voice, the non-hogwash assurance that had procured her a standing as one of the most keen lawful minds in the city. Her certainty provided him with a glint of consolation. However, the heaviness of the circumstance actually squeezed vigorously on him. "I'll remain silent," Isaiah guaranteed, "yet they're raising. They've currently drifted, capturing me for check." Rebecca's calm reveal on the opposite stopping point was bound with fierceness. "They're playing a hazardous game," she said firmly. "Hold on, I'll be there shortly. Don't give them anything they can use against you." Isaiah finished the get back to sliding his telephone into his pocket similarly as the more seasoned official moved toward him again. His demeanor was harsh, however there was a clue of pomposity in his stance, like he accepted the fight had proactively been won. "Mr. Carter," the official started, his tone falsely amiable, "we actually looking out for confirmation for your reports. Meanwhile, you really want to remain where you are, assuming that you attempt to pass on we'll have no real option except to confine you." Isaiah gave a sluggish gesture, his face unintelligible. "Comprehended," he answered equitably. "Yet, my legal counselor will be here not long from now, and I believe that will not be issue." The official's level-headedness vacillated for a split second, sufficiently lengthy for Isaiah to see, yet the grin returned rapidly. "I'll be at more vulnerable this time, obviously," the official said. However, the words needed conviction. The quiet that followed was thick with strain. Isaiah held his ground, declining to be threatened. He had contended energetically, forfeited a lot to allow minutes to like this shake him. He turned his look toward the terminal, where a little horde of workers kept on social event murmuring among themselves. Their mumble resembled a far-off murmur in Isaiah's ears. Unimportant. Foundation commotion to the contention working out before him. Minute extended into a horrifying. Forever Isaiah remained with his hands in his pockets, his stance loose yet his brain dashing through each conceivable result. The officials waited close by, trading murmurs and looks, their disappointment obvious. It was clear they were trusting he'd goof convince them to raise further. However, Isaiah realized this content, he'd experienced it prior to. Various appearances changed areas, however consistently a similar story. An oncoming motor ended the tent quiet. Isaiah moved in the direction of the source and felt a rush of help as Rebecca's smooth dark vehicle materialized, pulling up to the edge of the runway. She ventured out with reason, her heels clicking strongly against the asphalt, wearing a custom-fitted suit and conveying a calfskin portfolio. Rebecca emanated certainty and authority. Her presence was a glaring difference to the turmoil twirling around Isaiah. She burned through no time. Who's in control here? Rebecca requested, her voice slicing through the air like a whip. The more seasoned official ventured forward, his rough disposition undaunted by her sudden entry. That would be me, he said. And you are Rebecca Green, she answered, blazing her certifications with a rehearsed flick of her wrist. I'm Mr. Carter's lawful direction. I really want to know precisely exact things happening here. The official squared his shoulders, obviously disinterested by her presence. We're directing an examination, he said straight. Mr. Carter's case of proprietorship is under audit. Rebecca's eyes restricted, her demeanor I see under survey. By whom? He's given all the fundamental documentation. You have no lawful grounds to confine him. The more youthful official ventured forward, encouraged by his associate's presence. We're simply being wary, he said with an egotistical grin. You can't believe all that at face esteem these days. Rebecca turned her steely look on him, her voice dropping to a perilously low tone. What I realize, she said gradually, is that you're proceeding hazardously close to unlawful confinement. My client misunderstands entirely. Sat idle and consistently you proceed with this unjustifiable. Kate is freeing you up to serious lawful results. The more established official moved awkwardly, the heaviness of her words plainly soaking in. We're simply following convention, he mumbled. However, the certainty in his tone had disappeared. Rebecca made a stride nearer her, look tenacious. Then, at that point, you'd better expectation. Your convention remembers a segment for unlawful detainment, she said strongly. Discharge my client right away or you'll be hearing from an adjudicator. Isaiah watched the trade, a tranquil fulfillment settling over him for the first time the entire morning. The overall influence was moving in support of himself. Rebecca ventured nearer, her look locked onto his. Then you would do well to trust your convention remembers a segment for unlawful detainment, she said immovably, in light of the fact that that is precisely what you're doing. Deliver him now or I'll have an adjudicator on the telephone inside the hour. The official opened his mouth to contend, yet Rebecca lifted a hand to quietness him. You have no case, she said straight, and the more you proceed with this garbage, the more terrible it will. Search for you. A strained quiet fell over the gathering. The officials traded dubious looks, the heaviness of Rebecca's words plainly soaking in. Isaiah watched the trade with calm fulfillment. Rebecca was steady and they knew it. There was no path of least resistance for them now. After what felt like an unfathomable length of time, the more seasoned official gave a hesitant gesture. Fine, he murmured, heck, allowed to go, yet we'll watch out for this present circumstance. Rebecca gave him a dainty tight-lipped grin that didn't contact her eyes. You do that, she said coolly, and we'll watch out for you. She went to Isaiah, her appearance mellowing marginally. How about we go, she said unobtrusively. Isaiah gestured appreciative for her presence yet stewing with outrage as they strolled back toward the fly he was unable to stand up to. Looking behind him at the officials, they were clustered together murmuring faintly. The air terminal workers, detecting the show was over, started to scatter. Isaiah knew better than to naturally suspect this was genuinely over. By no stretch of the imagination he was resolved dead to guarantee those mindful would confront the outcomes of their activities. As he moved once again into the cockpit, Rebecca remained at the foundation of the means, her demeanor undaunted. "I'll settle on certain decisions," she said. "We'll ensure this doesn't reoccur." Isaiah dealt with a tight grin. "Thank you, Rebecca," she connected. Furthermore, gave his shoulder a consoling squeeze. "Deal with yourself, Isaiah. Don't allow them to get to you." He gestured, his articulation muddled as he shut the cockpit entryway and started getting ready for departure. Inside, his determination consumed. More brilliant than any time in recent memory. This battle wasn't over, not yet. Isaiah sat in the cockpit, his hands laying on the controls, his brain hustling with the occasions of the last hour. The pressure inside him hadn't completely dispersed in spite of Rebecca's firm mediation while his lawful guard was set up. The sting of how rapidly things had spiraled into aggression weighted like a significant burden on his chest. He had gone through years carefully assembling his standing, guaranteeing that no detail of his business or individual life could be addressed, but then here he was again compelled to shield his resources as well as his very character. Similarly, as he was going to drive up the plane frameworks, his telephone hummed. He looked at the screen and saw a message from his colleague Imprint Delaney. "On our way, keep things under control." Isaiah breathed out pointedly. Of the multitude of mornings for things to go sideways, it must be this one, the day he should settle an arrangement that would stamp a defining moment for his organization. The consolidation with Imprint's firm was basic. Assuming this gathering were postponed too lengthy, the gradually expanding influences could be obliterating, possibly costing him millions. A thump at the cockpit entryway frightened him. Isaiah went to consider Rebecca remaining external, her appearance to be sharp as at any point. "We're not finished at this point," she said through the marginally open entryway. "Your colleagues just showed up. I've requested that they go along with us." I gestured, opening the entryway completely and venturing down onto the landing area. Somewhere far off, two figures were moving toward Imprint Delaney. Furthermore, another accomplice, Na Harris, were. "We came when we heard what the heck is happening here." Before Isaiah could answer, Na added, her sharp eyes shot toward the officials who were all the while watching the scene unfurl from a distance. "This is incredible," she said, her voice overflowing with outrage. "We've been colleagues for quite a long time and they're dealing with you like a lawbreaker. What's the ongoing status?" Rebecca Green ventured forward, her expert disposition unshaken. "We've gained ground," she said freshly. "The officials have been compelled to remain down and Isaiah is allowed to leave anyway. This is a long way from being done. I'm suggesting we push ahead with a conventional protest. This is a reasonable instance of racial profiling. Also, unlawful confinement." Imprint's eyes restricted as he looked at the officials. "Great," he said, his tone sharp. "They should be considered responsible. What they've done isn't simply amateurish, it's dishonorable." Na gestured in arrangement. "I'll ensure our PR group is prepared to deal with any aftermath," she added. "This sort of story will stand out regardless of whether we need it to." Isaiah valued their help, however, was very much in the know about the sensitive equilibrium he needed to keep up with. On one hand, his accomplices were correct. This required to have been tended to openly. Then again, the consolidation was still underway and to an extreme negative consideration could risk the arrangement. "Weck, address it," Isaiah said, his voice quiet however fearless. "Be that as it may, Until further notice we want to zero in on the business in question. The arrangement stays the need. Rebecca gave a slight gesture. Perceived. I'll deal with the lawful side and we have some control over the public reaction until everything looks good as they talked. An air terminal authority who had followed Imprint and Nina at long last ventured forward. His face was flushed with humiliation and he looked apparently uncomfortable. Mr. Carter, the man started, his voice tight with nerves. In the interest of Westbridge Runway, I need to expand our sincerest conciliatory sentiments for this misconception we had no clue about. Course you didn't. Not cut in her tone frosty, yet you ought to have. How should something like this even happen? The authority stammered, his wide eyes dashing apprehensively between the gathering. It was an innocent slip-up, I guarantee you. We basically needed to check, confirm what Imprint intruded on, his voice ascending with outrage, that a person of color can claim a stream, that he can steer his own airplane. This wasn't about confirmation, it was about bias. The authority winced at Imprint's sharp words, noticeably awkward. Under the examination of the gathering, I guarantee you there was no evil plan, he faltered. We treat our security conventions extremely in a serious way, and some of the time well. In some cases these things happen. Rebecca rehashed, her voice well honed. Do you understand how crazy that sounds? That is not a reason, it's a confirmation of disappointment. The authority's face reddened further and he appeared to shrivel under the heaviness of their aggregate look. I'll ensure this at no point ever occurs in the future, he muttered, venturing back marginally. Isaiah watched the connection unfurl with a feeling of separation. This man wasn't the foe, he was a side effect of a more profound issue. The main problem lay inside the actual framework, which made it so natural for individuals like Isaiah to be questioned, addressed, and minimized regardless of how effective or achieved they were. We're not looking for void commitments, Isaiah said, his voice quiet however legitimate. We're searching for change. This can't reoccur, not to me, not to anybody. The authority gestured quickly, energetic to end the discussion. Obviously, Mr. Carter, I'll guarantee changes are made promptly if it's not too much trouble. Acknowledge our sincerest statements of regret. Isaiah gave a brief gesture. Thank you. With that the authorities hurried away, leaving Isaiah and his group remaining by the fly across the runway. The officials actually waited close there. Watch vehicle. However, they made no further endeavors to move toward. Their dissatisfaction and disquiet were obvious. Isaiah felt a peculiar feeling of fulfillment. They had attempted to subvert him and they had bombed. Now they were the ones remaining. Feeling frail, Imprint went to Isaiah, his demeanor mellowing somewhat. You taken care of that well, he said. However, you shouldn't need to manage this at all. Isaiah moaned, the heaviness of the morning's occasions pushing down on him. It's essential for the truth I live with, he said unobtrusively, yet I won't let it stop me. Rebecca gave Isaiah a consoling gesture. We'll take it from here, she said. The lawful side is taken care of and I'll ensure this is tended to appropriately. Isaiah dealt with a little grin. Bless your heart, Rebecca. She gave his shoulder a concise press prior to venturing back. Deal with yourself, Isaiah, and don't let them get to you. Isaiah Carter attracted a full breath, taking himself. We have work to do, he said, his voice quiet however steadfast. Na Harris put a hand on his arm, her tone consistent yet strong. We with you, Isaiah, anything that you want. Isaiah gestured, profoundly energetic about their fortitude. Letton Center, he said. We've burned through enough time. This arrangement needs to happen. Rebecca Green never need to miss a beat, ventured forward, her telephone currently close by. I'm settling on a couple of decisions, she said energetically. I'll guarantee the lawful side is impermeable. You'll hear from me about any update. Until further notice, center around your gathering. Isaiah looked as Rebecca strode toward her. Vehicle previously fascinated in a discussion with somebody on the opposite stopping point. He realized she would deal with the legitimate outcome faultlessly. However, the close-to-home load of the morning-weighted achievement had shown Isaiah numerous examples, yet one of the cruelest bits of insight was that it didn't safeguard him from bias, it just made the objective on his back more prominent. Notwithstanding the help of his group, the morning's occasions weighed intensely on him as Isaiah moved in the direction of the stream. Imprint Delaney and Nina followed intently behind. Their presence was an update that he wasn't battling this fight alone. They were accomplices in business and when essential partners, and exploring the difficulties that accompanied his prosperity. Together them three moved on board the flight prepared to leave. The disorder behind Isaiah sunk into the pilot seat, breathing out leisurely as he changed the controls. Yet, indeed, even as the motors thundered to life and the airplane started to move down the runway, the pressure in his chest didn't completely disperse. Imprint and Na sat discreetly in the lodge, giving Isaiah the space he required. As the plane lifted out of sight, Isaiah watched Westbridge runway recoil beneath him. The heaviness of the morning's trial started to lift, however it didn't vanish. Rebecca's words repeated to him, "This is a long way from being done, not entirely set in stone to guarantee account capacity. Everybody liable for what happened would confront the outcomes and changes would be made to keep others from encountering a similar treatment." The consistent murmur of the stream given a scenery to Isaiah's viewpoints. As he pondered the occasions of the day, his psyche meandered to the endless other people who had confronted comparative segregation yet missed the mark on assets, legitimate help or impact to retaliate. This occurrence wasn't just about him, it was an impression of a lot bigger SYSTCic issue. The flight gave him an uncommon mental breakthrough. He contemplated individuals denied open doors, hassled or excused basically on account of the shade of their skin. This battle wasn't simply private, it was tied in with starting a trend and preparing for change. When the stream arrived in New York, Rebecca was at that point hanging tight for them at the edge of the landing area. Her telephone was squeezed to her ear, her demeanor a combination of concentration and dissatisfaction. When Isaiah ventured off the plane, Rebecca also had her call and strode toward him, skirting any merriments they're attempting to cover this. She said gruffly, "The police office and air terminal organization are scrambling to cover their tracks. They're outlining this as a misconception, trusting it will blow over." Isaiah's jaw fixed. "They can't be permitted to leave this," he said immovably. "Not this time." Rebecca gestured, her purpose coordinating his. "I previously documented a proper grievance," she said. "The officials included are confronting an inner examination and I've cautioned the media. The story is opening up to the world. They don't get to imagine it didn't occur." Imprint and Nina went along with them, both gesturing in understanding. "We'll ensure our PR group is prepared to deal with the aftermath," Na said unhesitatingly. "This isn't just about safeguarding your standing, Isaiah. It's tied in with saying something." Isaiah valued their help yet realized this was just the starting. "What might be said about the air terminal?" he asked Rebecca. "What outcomes are they confronting?" Rebecca's tone was sharp. "The organization is scrambling to conceal any hint of failure. They put out a proper expression of remorse, however that is not anywhere close to enough. I'm pushing for fundamental changes required. Enemy of segregation, preparing new conventions for dealing with private airplane and public responsibility." Isaiah's demeanor solidified his assurance. "Obvious, great," he said. "However, I need those officials considered responsible. They didn't simply make ICE stake, they followed up on bias. They need to deal with any consequences regarding that." Rebecca's appearance obscured She guaranteed we're documenting a social equality claim against both the police division and the air terminal. This isn't just about remuneration, it's tied in with guaranteeing this at no point ever occurs in the future. Isaiah gestured his determination unshaken. Make it happen. Rebecca gave him a consoling pat on the shoulder prior to turning around to her telephone, previously dialing another number. To push the cycle forward, Maris and Nina remained nearby, presence a quiet however strong update that Isaiah wasn't in this battle alone. In the days that followed the episode at Westbridge Runway, the story picked up relentless speed. Online entertainment stages ejected with conversations about racial profiling, foundational prejudice. Also, the dire requirement for change and policing individuals from varying backgrounds called for responsibility, sharing their shock and requesting equity. The tension on power was gigantic. The police division had to give a public assertion recognizing an interior examination into the activities of the officials included in the interim. The air terminal organization mixed to Isaiah's expert undertakings pushed on the consolidation with Imprint. Delaney's organization pushed ahead effortlessly. The experience, however debilitating, had just fortified their purpose to succeed, demonstrating that no measure of bias could crash their plans. One Sunday evening, Isaiah sat in his office, the city horizon extending before him through the wide glass windows. His telephone hummed and Rebecca's name streaked on the screen. We've made progress, Rebecca said when he addressed her. Tone conveyed the certainty Isaiah had come to depend on. The officials are confronting disciplinary activity and the air terminal has consented to execute the foundational transforms we requested. We've moreover gotten a settlement, yet more significantly we've started a trend this case will make them think long and hard about. We're following up on their predispositions again. Isaiah reclined in his seat, a flood of fulfillment washing over him. This wasn't simply a legitimate win, it was a strong assertion. Thank you, Rebecca, he said unobtrusively, the appreciation obvious in his voice. Rebecca's tone relaxed. This is only the starting, Isaiah. We're not finished at this point, however. Basically, we've taken the first step. After the call finished, Isaiah sat peacefully pondering the excursion that had carried him to this second. He thought about his more youthful self, a man who had confronted a large number of dismissals, told over and over that he didn't have a place in specific spaces, and presently he was right here, demonstrating them completely off base. Yet this triumph wasn't just about his prosperity, it was about his enduring assurance to drive change. Isaiah went to the horizon, his brain currently on the challenges ahead. There would be more fights to battle, more walls to separate, however he was prepared. The morning Sunday immersed Isaiah's office as he arranged for the day. The beyond couple of weeks had been a hurricane of claims, media inclusion, general acknowledgements and institutional approach changes. Yet presently, as he evaluated the last records for the consolidation, a feeling of quiet settled over him. This fight wasn't only for his standing, it was for the incalculable other people who confronted comparative battles yet didn't have the assets or stage to retaliate. Isaiah reclined in his seat, looking out at the city underneath it. Was striking how rapidly life could transform. 1 second he was planning for a standard excursion for work, the following he was entangled in a lawful and advertising storm. But as he thought back, he saw the significance of what had unfolded. The experience had uncovered a framework that flourished with bias, and however the fight wasn't over, Isaiah had figured out how to break that wall. A thump at the entryway interfered with his viewpoints. Imprint Delaney and Na Harris stepped in, their energy lifting the room's out air. The heaviness of the previous week started to ease as they pulled together on the future. All set for the last gathering? Imprint inquired. Dropping into a seat inverse, Isaiah gestured, looking at the consolidation records before him. Everything's all together, he said. This arrangement will set our organization's venture into the global market. Na grinned, her eyes shining with satisfaction. You've come so far, Isaiah. This consolidation will take us to the powerful. I can hardly stand by to see where we'll be in about a year. Isaiah grinned back. However, his contemplations waited on the excursion that had brought him here. The bedlam following the air terminal episode had been overpowering. Media interviews, gatherings with Rebecca, and vast reports on the legitimate cycle. The air terminal organization's general acknowledgement had been quick, trailed by the police office's hesitant affirmation of the unfortunate behavior. Changes were guaranteed, required preparing new conventions for taking care of private flights, and keeping in mind that it was a positive development. Isaiah realized there was something else to be finished with. Rebecca's constant quest for equity. The officials included confronted suspension and inside examinations. Discusses more extensive changes inside the office were starting to take shape. Change would be sluggish, yet the effect of Isaiah's case was unquestionable. The repayment they had gotten was significant, yet cash had never been the point. What made the biggest difference was uncovering the imperfect framework and guaranteeing substantial ramifications for the people who followed up on bias as the three accomplices arranged for their gathering. Isaiah felt a restored feeling of direction. This consolidation wasn't just about business achievement, it was about demonstrating that no measure of separation could keep him down, and keeping in mind that the battle for uniformity was a long way from being done. Isaiah realized he had proactively left a critical mark on the walls that had once remained in his way. What was in store was brilliant, and he was prepared to confront it head-on. Isaiah's legal counselor, Rebecca Green, had been vigorous in her quest for equity. Her endeavors had driven to the suspension of the officials included who were currently confronting interior examinations. Discusses more extensive departmental changes were additionally in progress. While Isaiah realized significant change would take time, he tracked down comfort in the truth that his case had started progress. The settlement they had gotten, however huge, wasn't the genuine triumph for Isaiah. The significance lay in uncovering a defective framework and driving substantial results. This success wasn't only for him, it was for anybody who'd at any point been questioned, minimized, or denied potential open doors as a result of their race. As Isaiah sat in the gathering room with Imprint Delaney and Na Harris, a calm reflection settled over the gathering. Isaiah ended the quiet. "I've contemplating happened," he said, his voice quiet however unflinching, "and I hold returning to a similar idea. This quarrel isn't simply over what happened to me, it's tied in with changing the framework so others don't need to go through exactly the same thing." Imprint gestured mindfully. "It's more than simply an individual fight, that is without a doubt," he said. Na inclined forward, her articulation serious. "You're correct, Isaiah. We can't allow this energy to blur. You've got a stage now as an effective money manager as well as somebody who can drive genuine change." Isaiah grinned at the idea. However, it wasn't simply a grin of fulfillment, it was a grin of assurance. "I'm intending to precisely do that," he said. "This organization has developed past what I at any point envisioned. However, there's additional we can do. I believe we should put resources into networks and set out open doors for individuals who've been kept down by similar biases I've confronted." Imprint smiled, reclining in his seat. "Well, that is something I can get behind. A business that offers in return and makes enduring change." Na raised an eyebrow. "So what's the arrangement? A new Drive an establishment. Isaiah gestured his psyche previously humming with conceivable outcomes. I need to begin a establishment zeroed in on training, mentorship and lawful help for individuals affected by racial profiling and segregation. It's not just about facing legitimate conflicts, it's tied in with giving individuals the devices they need to succeed. The room fell calm as the gravity of Isaiah's vision got comfortable. This wasn't simply a thought, it was a strong move toward reshaping lives and separating hindrances that had existed for a really long time. That is staggering, Na said, her voice brimming with adoration. You're transforming what is happening into something positive, something that can help so many individuals. Isaiah felt a swell of pride. However, it wasn't just about his prosperity any longer. It was about the future, about utilizing the stage he had worked to elevate others. I've been fortunate, he said discreetly. I've had the assets and the help to retaliate. However, not every person does that. Requirements to change. Imprint and Na traded looks, the two of them gesturing in understanding. We're with you, Imprint said solidly. Anything that you want to get this going, we'll get it going. As the meeting proceeded with, Isaiah felt a feeling of direction more grounded than any time in recent memory. The difficulties he had confronted had brought him to this second a junction where he could go difficulty into opportunity. He realized the street ahead would be hard, however, without precedent. For weeks he felt a significant feeling of lucidity. This wasn't just about him any longer, it was tied in with building a tradition of progress, one that would engage others and destroy the hindrances that had remained in their way for a really long time. Isaiah Carter wasn't simply traveling higher than ever in his business, he was diagramming a course for a superior future, and nothing could stop him now.